I've been praying all week on a movie to really go down deep into the experience of forgiveness and delight beyond. And so I have to say that during this week, I was watching the movie poll and seeing what the topics were going to be to help launch us down deep into an experience so we can have a shared experience. And actually, the movie poll came up with some really good ones, both in the Spanish and the English. The top one combined of all the votes was uh, not knowing, basically allowing myself not to know and making no conclusions. There was 82 votes for that. And then staying in the present moment. So those were our big themes. And when I looked at those two themes, I thought, wow, that's it. Jesus is giving us both the entrance to the gateway to eternity and the actual gateway to eternity. He's taking us right to the edge. And the first one is about not knowing anything. And we've heard it talked about in Buddhism and in Christianity and many different spiritualities. It's about emptying the mind and coming to a state where you don't know anything about anything. In Buddhism, they call this beginner's mind, beginner's Zen mind. And when you think you know something about this world, that is the greatest block to the experience of the present moment and of reality, because it's a false sense of knowing something, which comes from belief, and beliefs that blocks the awareness of light, the presence of light. I remember back in the early 1990s, I had people starting to show up in my life, and they kept showing up from different places, and they would say things to me like, oh, I found you, you are my teacher. And I worked with a group of students for basically on a daily basis in those early 1990s. And basically we would just approach every session that we had together, starting off with, does anybody think they know anything about anything? Because the I know mind, which is the mind of the ego and the mind of beliefs, is the block to the awareness of the state of mind of pure acceptance and pure happiness. You can't even come to know yourself as a dreamer of the dream of this world until you are willing to first see that you don't know anything about the world. And typically we show movies that involves the use of symbols and what I would call character transformation. A lot of the movies we show, the main character or many of the characters will go through quite a movement in consciousness and symbolically seem to expand, open up, grow, learn lessons, become brighter, happier. And yet, today's movie will kind of go in a bit of a more of an inward direction. When I was praying to Jesus this week, he said, well, it's time for us with our movie workshops to take a more direct approach toward the truth today. And then I was just open to what kind of movie or learning device would be helpful for that. And then on Thursday, it was interesting, 2 days ago on Thursday, I became aware that Thursday was the 21st day of the 21st century. And I thought, oh my gosh, that seems like a powerful symbol. The 21st day of the 21st century. And indeed, that's when Jesus started to give me the tool that I would be using with you, the movie that I would use for today's experience. This movie is, I would say, more of a documentary of going inward, and we've shown some movies like that. I think we showed one a while back last year called Samadhi, which was quite a deep dive inward. Some of you may have been aware of that or participated in that weekend retreat. But I would say that the movie we're going to watch today will take you closer and closer to the idea that this world is a world of ideas. And Jesus does say this in the Course, that the world is a world of ideas. What does that mean? It means that the world is a world of concepts, and basically these concepts are in the sleeping mind. These are part of the wrong-minded perception of the world, perception of differences, perception of separate people, places, things, separate segments of time, separate segments of space. And as I've said many times, the only problem there is that needs to be released is that it is a perceptual problem. It is not what it seems to be through human experience. You may experience the perceptual problem in a smaller scale, we could call it, in terms of bodily health or in terms of finances or in terms of interpersonal relationships, but those aren't really the problem. Those are more the symptoms of the problem, and the problem is perceiving a cracked world, perceiving a fragmented world of separate people, places, things, separate parts, where everything seems to be distinctly separate. And this fragmented perception is the problem. So our movie today is going to help you come a little bit closer to an acceptance in your mind that it's a perceptual problem. As long as the mind is distracted trying to solve the problems of the world, whether they're interpersonal, whether they're national, whether they're political, whether they seem to be involving the body and various symptoms, whether it seems to involve psychological discomfort and symptoms, it doesn't really matter once you begin to see that it's a perceptual problem. Sometimes I've described this perceptual problem as a hallucination. Actually, if some of you are doing the workbook lessons of A Course in Miracles starting on lesson number 1 on January 1st, today is the 23rd, and so today's lesson is I can escape from the world I see by giving up attack thoughts. And even if you're doing today's lesson, you are well prepared for our movie workshop today, because in that lesson, Jesus is basically saying that what you consider to be the thought that you think and the world that you think you see, he says fantasy is a better word for these thoughts that preoccupy your consciousness. And he says hallucination is a better word than seeing. And that starts to put things into context. When we've become accustomed to think that the body can see and the body can hear and feel and smell and taste, actually all the 5 senses are part of the hallucination. And it's the thinking in the mind where the change can occur. He comes right out in lesson number 23 today and says, you cannot change the world, but you can change your thoughts about the world. And then in that sense, he says you are changing the cause. When he says you cannot change the world, he's simply saying that the world is a projection of false thinking. So It's an effect of egoic thinking. It's an effect of grievances. It's an effect of judgments. It's an effect of attack thoughts. And the workbook lesson for today is I can escape the world I see by giving up attack thoughts. So he's really giving us a direct approach towards the kingdom of heaven within. He's saying that as long as you are still trying to define problems and issues and themes in the world, and you're trying to make correction in the appearances, in the images, you are trying to change what cannot be changed. Basically, he's told us that what you perceive as the world is a prearranged script that's already written and it's already over and done. So you're simply reviewing mentally what has already gone by, what has already been healed. The Holy Spirit healed it in an instant, and you're still reviewing mentally, believing it's still happening. And that belief is the ego. It made the world, and also it made this linear perception of time and space. So when we start to explore this, we have to start to really ask the question, what is the purpose for my perception of the world? And the reason we want to ask that is we really have to question how we are seeing the world. If we're perceiving a world, we can't just openly pretend like we're an ostrich and bury our head in the sand and just put our head in the sand and say it's not there. Jesus told me it's not there, I'm just going to believe him. He's basically saying you have to see that how you look upon the world is so important, because how you're looking upon the world is determining your experience of the world. It's determining your emotions as you go through and feel. It's all coming from how you look upon the world. Now, I know a lot of you have looked at this world and you've just said, there has to be a better way. There has to be something more than this world. There has to be some kind of an escape. And I'm going to have to look to Spirit to guide me to make that escape. Because why? Because it hasn't been a consistently happy experience. If it's not supremely happy, then there's a question that rises up like, what is this and how do I get out of it? We know from beautiful fairy tales we have that Lewis Carroll wrote a book about Alice, and Alice went down the looking glass. She went down the rabbit hole, and basically she experienced a pretty traumatic experience. But this metaphor of going down the rabbit hole is basically used a lot in spiritual terms to say you have to get underneath what you're perceiving. And that's another way of saying you want to get to the bottom of the error. You want to expose the lie and then see the truth behind the lie. You want to go beyond this tiny perceptual experience that involves a personality self and a seemingly vast external world outside that personality self into this unified experience of just being at one with everything, being totally connected. And a lot of you know I really have enjoyed science, taking science and taking that rabbit hole down through quantum physics to come to this beautiful state of mind. Some of you know I enjoyed taking the psychological route. I would say starting off with more of a humanistic route and then going into a transpersonal psychology route that took me down into this experience. Many of you have been raised with a particular religion. Some of you may be atheists or agnostic, but many of you have been raised in a particular religious theology and religious tradition, and that's another springboard. If you go deep enough, you can go down the rabbit hole of the mind and come to find the truth, the light, the consistency of happiness and joy and peace, the happy dream that Jesus talks about in A Course in Miracles, the forgiven world. So I would say that what we're interested in doing, whether we take literature as a route, or psychology as a route, or philosophy as a route, or religion, or science and quantum physics, we want to have an experience that transcends this fragmented perception. We want to be taken into a direct experience. For those of you that are doing the workbook of A Course in Miracles, actually today's lesson number 23, basically Jesus says you see the world that you have made, but you do not see yourself as the image maker. You cannot be saved from the world, but you can escape from its cause. This is what salvation means. For where is the world you see when its cause is gone? And spiritual vision is light. Spiritual vision is the vision of Christ. It's pure light. And even if we look at science throughout history, we see these attempts to understand the world and understand the nature of the world and the nature of the human condition and the nature of human beings. There's many questions. How did we get here? Why are we here? How do we escape? What do I have to do to escape? These are like fundamental, deep questions that I'd have to say, frankly, the ego is quite an expert at pushing them out of awareness so that you are preoccupied with a bunch of nothingness. Is there enough gasoline in my car? What's the weather this week going to be like? And all kinds of distractions and questions that are really questions about nothing. They really aren't even questions. They're just statements of belief in the ego. They don't really go anywhere. They're like double questions that have an answer that is an illusion, just like the question's an illusion, because it's asking about something as if it is there. It's asking a question about something that's just assumed to be true, and Jesus is saying it's not true. You're asking questions about things that don't even exist, and you can see how deceptive the ego is to get the mind caught up in asking unreal questions about unreal images. That is the height of insanity. That is what the sleeping mind is facing here. So as I prayed on a movie, I thought I need something that we can really use as a springboard to go into this together. And interestingly enough, there was a movie that came out in 2004 called Down the Rabbit Hole. No, actually the first one was called What the Bleep Do We Know? And then the sequel 2 years later was called What the Bleep Do We Know? Down the Rabbit Hole. So I prayed on that with the time allotted that we have today to actually go into it. And what I came to was, I'm going to use the second movie, which came out in 2006, What the Bleep Do We Know? Down the Rabbit Hole. And this one is the movie that actually has the character, the animated character, Dr. Quantum. Some of you might remember that. And this is going to be helpful for us because the movie is basically saying that what we have perceived as reality, meaning the projected world of time and space, isn't reality at all. And when we've looked for the solution, we've looked through it, lots of inventions, religions, the many religions and theologies of this world, in essence, are inventions. The scientific method is also an invention. And Jesus is saying this is a world of ideas. And yet, when you start to take these inventions, which are fictitious, to be reality, and even invent more inventions to try to discover the answers to this riddle of time and space, he says, you're going nowhere. It's like a cat chasing its tail, going around and around in circles. You're not even close to be still and know that I am God. You're just spinning around like a cat chasing its tail. And it may seem amusing, but actually you get pretty dizzy if you go in circles just chasing a tail. You need to go inward. You need to go beyond the world. And even most spiritualities involve a lot of discipline and rituals. Uh, and a lot of these rituals are repeating actions, repeating behaviors. It could be repeating postures, repeating breathing, repeating mantras. Uh, it could be repeating daily rituals of diet and various rituals that are supposed to have meaning, but actually it's very easy for the ego to use the rituals just as another defense against finding the present moment. And when we look at the attempt to understand the world, we could say that empirical science, which is just, we call it Newtonian physics, and Newtonian science is the attempt to measure and and test and experiment on the perceptual world to deduce what are the laws that govern the world. And this is what Newton did. So he has laws of physics, and when we talk about the laws of gravity and the physical processes, this is describing this external way of trying to understand the world through empiricism. And we have discovered that it doesn't work. The same way with different religions and churches and rituals, believing that there's good things and bad things, and you have to do the good things and avoid the bad things to make it back to heaven. A very dualistic picture, both in Newtonian science and in religion, of heaven and hell, of good and bad, of right and wrong, of moral and immoral, of ethical and unethical. All of that's still in the projected world. So that's why it hasn't succeeded in reaching the state that's prior to this world. But we do know with quantum physics that when the scientists began to look in the direction of smaller and smaller, in other words, in a world of bigger, better, faster, more, and a world of growth and expansion and everything supposedly adding on and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, defining progress as bigger and more, that actually the humbleness of going deeper and deeper down into the question, what is the building blocks of the material world? You know, around 450 years before Jesus, there was a man who was postulating about atoms, and these would be the smallest thing that you could divide material into that was not capable of being divided anymore. So he was postulating what an atom would be. And then now we know, many years later, that if you split an atom, you have enormous power that's released. That's how we have nuclear power, from splitting the atom. But this was an initial attempt to get to the smallest building blocks. Now we know that atoms actually have a center, nucleus of neutrons and protons, and then there's orbiting electrons. But what is underneath the subatomic particles